his mind and dragged the nightmare out into the light of day. Since then, it had been a living, breathing thing he'd had to fight against. He knew he looked like he could use at least a week's worth of rack time, but that didn't mean he couldn't still do his job. Dozer took a pull of his Sam Adams and made a disgusted face at Erik's drink choice.
Maybe if you weren't sucking on a bottle of water like a pussy, you wouldn't look like you were already in the shrink's office and ready to jump out of your skin.
Erik had decided to drive his truck tonight instead of cabbing it. He knew that without the responsibility of driving home, inebriation and bad choices were a lot more likely given his current state of mind. So water it was. "Thanks for the reminder, asshole," Erik answered, shaking his head. "Last thing I need is a goddamn shrink to tell me I can do my job."
Apparently our last psyche eval begs to differ. And not for nothing, Wolf, but don't think I haven't noticed the panic attacks at work in fires lately.
Erik scoffed and said, "You don't know what the fuck you're talking about. If I have problems catching my breath, it's because half the time we don't wear our SCBA, and it's finally getting to me. I'm not the first Jake to come out of BFD with leather lungs, and I certainly won't be the last."
"You're right about that."
Dozer took a swig of his Sam Adams and narrowed his gaze at Erik.
"But you're the Jake whose eval came back with PTSD stamped all over it in big, bold letters."
Erik flipped him off while glancing around the bar again, not really seeing anything. Every day he seemed to lose more control over what went on in his head. Experiencing that power plant blast had caused breaches in the mental hull he'd buried his shit behind years ago. The tiny fissures had grown into full cracks over the weeks, letting his demons seep through to wreak a fuck-ton of havoc in his life. But it's not like he'd gone batshit crazy, not yet, anyway. He still decided when, where, and how much of the darkness was released at a time. It was his method, and it worked. His control might be a little more strained than usual recently, but the added stress wasn't anything he couldn't handle. No fucking way was he letting himself get axed just because his new shrink might not agree. He loved his job, and that went double for the men and women he served with in the BFD. He'd rather die than abandon them, and it would take permanent paralysis before he chained himself to a desk to push papers and play politics. He'd known as much when he stood in front of the chief earlier. Erik took a long pull of his water as his mind replayed the earlier conversation. He'd looked his chief square in the eyes and asked, "Where do I need to go?" Bill had let out a rush of air like he'd been holding it, waiting for Erik's answer, then grabbed a file off his desk and handed it over. Erik had opened it to find forms filled out on his behalf, along with information on a shrink whose name sounded like a cross between a breakfast drink and a character in Raiders of the Lost Ark. And because he didn't know what else to say, Erik went with something totally inane. "Is that name a joke?"
"Pretty sure shrinks aren't allowed to have a sense of humor," Bill deadpanned. "You reported 08 on Monday. Don't be fucking late. And don't fuck this up. It's your ass on the line."
Erik had repressed the few choice words running through his head. "Yes, sir."
"All right. Get out of here, son. I'm sure you have plans with your crew. Go blow off some steam, and I'll check in with you next week."
He'd answered the chief with a curt nod and left to head home and get ready before meeting the guys at Phoenix. Home. Erik scoffed at the reference to the scant apartment that held all his worldly possessions. The Roxbury firehouse on Columbus Avenue was his home. Erik had lived for his job as a firefighter from day one. It gave him the chance to help people in his adopted community, and best of all, it kept him too damn busy to dwell on the past. Or at least it had. "Fuck," he muttered to himself as the noise of the club drowned out the memory. "I'm gonna need a damn hobby."
"Listen," Dozer said. "Why don't you grab yourself a baddie from that bachelorette party over there and get your mind off things? Just don't open your mouth or you're liable to kill the mood."
True to the call sign he'd earned early on in the Army, Dozer didn't bother mincing words. The phrase "tread light"